Welcome to the Property Mindset podcast, where I'm Emma Howitt, mentor, investor, and your guide to building wealth, freedom, and personal transformation through property. And property isn't just about bricks and mortar, it's about building the life you truly desire. In this space, we don't just talk strategy, we deep dive into mindset. And this is something I found is often missing in other industries, but it's been a real game changer in the professional property circle. So I am so thrilled. Today I have Julie Ford here. Hi, Julie.
Hi, Emma. Thanks for having me.
Oh, brilliant. Well, I am absolutely overwhelmed with Julie's knowledge. She literally brings over 25 years of experience in the private rented sector, and at one stage managed over 500 properties, from supporting tenants at the Citizens Advice Bureau to becoming a leading expert in compliance. She's literally done it all. She also is a trainer with the NRLA. She's on the Zoopla Lettings Advisory Board, creator of Landlords event in a box. So you are absolutely going to get a huge episode, straight talking practical advice. And don't forget to listen right until the end, where Julie tells you if you've ever had any concerns about tenants not paying their rent, or you've actually had rent arrears, she can tell you about the £1.7 billion that are available to cover rent arrears. So keep listening. So let's kick off and let's turn dreams into actions and actions into success. I'm just going to jump straight in, if I may, Julie. You have managed, I mean, I was overwhelmed looking at what you have achieved. You've managed over 500 properties, 25 years in the business. You're now literally shaping the future of lettings through your training and innovation. I mean, what's the mindset secret behind that kind of sustained success?
I don't think there's any real secret to it. And I think until I sort of met you and sort of got into this training element of property, mindset hadn't been something that was at the forefront of my day-to-day life, to be honest with you. I'm very much a just get shit done kind of girl, and that's how I've gone through my property life and my career. And I suppose realistically, when you're talking about how did I get to that point, it was a balance of because I knew I could, and the other point of if I didn't, I was going to be homeless with no food on the table. So there was a lot of sort of, I suppose, dark drive that comes to get you to a point where you do succeed. It's not always, puppies and flowers that gets you to where you are. Sometimes it's, you literally have nothing to lose, so you've got to do it. You've got to take the plunge.
Amazing, amazing. And I do like it when people kind of say, oh yeah, it wasn't really my mindset. I mean, to me, if I may say so, that is somebody who has an unconscious competence. So you are naturally good at something, you just may not have realized that was what you were doing. And that's certainly what I see. And when you talk about getting shit done, I mean, that is definitely a mindset thing, because you have some people that just don't get stuff done. There's so many people that can fall into that procrastination camp. And you also said, I knew I just had to get it done, or you basically indicated that it just had to happen. And there's kind of like this inner faith. Now, it doesn't matter if it's God or the universe or just faith in yourself. You just knew. So a lot of these things, for me, I love working with people, because some people, it springs out why they're successful and why they're achieving these things. And other people, you can see, well, if you could work on that, I think things would really change for you. And then finally, I love it, and I'm a bit like this, is this drive to be able to eat, feed your family, buy some fuel, all of those kind of things. Yeah. And that's quite an aid in determination. And some people, try and run away from that, and other people, it really drives them. So yeah, that's fantastic. So, well, if anyone hasn't heard of you, if you wouldn't mind taking us back to perhaps how you got into this industry, because let's be fair, I mean, 25 years in one of the UK's toughest, most regulated market, being property. How did you get into it?
By accident.
Typical. I love it. Yeah.
So many, many years ago, when the world was still in black and white and everybody had manners,
I like
I
it.
married a squaddie when I was 18 years old.
Mm.
So that meant I couldn't settle in one place. I was following him around the country. We eventually settled in North London, where because he was household cavalry, he was then between Knightsbridge and Windsor. So we were pretty permanent by that point. I still didn't know what I wanted to be when I grew up. And was just starting to look at sort of local jobs that were in walking distance, to be honest with you. And there was a new build property that was going up for phases, and they wanted new build salespeople. And this was a beautiful building, now called Princess Park Manor in Fry and Barnet, but it used to be the old Fry and Barnet Mental Hospital. It's actually in the Guinness Book of Records for the longest corridor for any hospital. And they'd turned these into luxury apartments. So I went along and got the job, sat there trying to sell things to people who clearly didn't want to buy it. And I realized very, very quickly, I have no patience to sit there and stroke someone's ego and get them to buy something off plan when clearly they'd rather be somewhere else. So I wasn't very good at that. But as soon as somebody came back and said, I've bought this property, the tile's fallen off, the mastic's come out from around the bath, all of a sudden I just sprung into action. Like this was my superpower. I'd go and find the tiler, I'd go and find the plumber, and within half an hour, solved. I was like, I'm a problem solver. I'm not a salesperson, I solve problems. So from that point onwards, I was like, yeah, I'm not selling anything anymore. And I moved straight into property management. And I just found my place in the world, to be honest with you. I was solving everybody's problem on a daily basis, my director's problem, the landlord's problem, the tenant's problem. I was in my element. And quickly sort of worked my way up to head of asset and property management for a large London firm. I was managing portfolios for A-list celebrities, Formula One stars, Premiership footballers, all of which I can't mention other than Ricky Gervais. He doesn't care, but he was one of my landlords. I worked predominantly with his partner, Jane, who was the brains of the business. And then yeah, from that point onwards, I suppose really the rest is history, just taking sort of different paths and trajectories, but staying within the realms of property.
Wow. So it certainly looks like, problem solving. And this is a huge one in, I think, in any elements of property and also business. Shit happens, things go wrong. And if you are in any way thinking that you're going to go through life and problems aren't going to arise, you're basically in a shoebox somewhere dying. So, but there are times when, massive things happen. So you immediately saw that you were in your element with problem solving. But oh my, talk me through a little bit of this, because I like problem solving. And, my daughter who's 9, sometimes get a bit annoyed with me. And she says, oh, mummy, you literally got a solution for everything. But sometimes it can be overwhelming. How are you able to juggle that overwhelm? Because, as you said, even that first property that came to you, it was kind of like, this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong. And it can sometimes feel like a, big old long list. And then other times it can literally feel like I can't even find a solution to that. How do you deal with the overwhelm with such a huge task?
I think realistically, and now I'm, touching that cusp of 50, I think a lot of it genuinely comes with maturity. Because when I was younger, in my early 20s, and someone came to me with a problem, I wanted to be the superhero that solved everything because that then stroked my ego. Whereas as I got older, I realized that actually the problem solving just made my life easier. And I got to that whole work smarter, not harder kind of element. So if I can think outside the box and solve someone's problem, great. I don't have to deal with that for the rest of the day. That's done and dusted. But I would say that the other thing that comes with maturity is learning that it's not personal. I mean, I have been called some things on the phone. I mean, when I was working at the asset and management company in London, as a younger property manager, the amount of times I just sat at my desk in tears because what people had said to me, names they'd called me. But then you just learn to get a bit of a thicker skin, I think, really. I mean, I could probably sit and talk all day about some of the stories, but
Please
when
do.
I was working when I was working in North London, just for
Mm.
a standard little letting agency, um, we dealt quite a lot with social housing providers, local councils, and I remember one day somebody rang up with a very thick, I think it was African accent, so I was struggling to understand. So I was asking them to slow down, and eventually it worked out there'd been a disrepair. And this person said if I didn't send a plumber now, they were going to send the Nigerian mafia after me. They knew where I lived. Well, first of all, I didn't even know Nigeria had a mafia. And I was like, how do they know where I live? Half the time when I leave the pub, I don't know where I live. So I was, and of course, back then you didn't have the internet as rifely as you do now. So I couldn't
Mm.
just Google Nigerian mafia to myself for about 3 months. Lord, I sent that plum around quicker than you'd got anybody around there. And it turns out it was just some very shouty man, and there wasn't actually a Nigerian mafia. But, you know, things like that, you then learn to just take it with a pinch of salt. Okay, well, if you send in a Nigerian mafia around, let me know. I'll put kettle on for them. You know, you start getting a little bit sarky back, but you have to kind of pick your battles with that. But yeah, I think it is just maturity, and it's also understanding that it's no longer about me. It isn't about my ego and, oh, Julie is fixing things, isn't Julie amazing? It's actually, what is the outcome that the other people are looking for? Because sometimes I could find a solution and it's nowhere near what they wanted as their solution. When I was I'm also a qualified mediator, and I've done over 500 mediations for the property redress scheme between landlord and tenant. And my favourite one, well, not my favourite one, but the one that is the most obscure, was a tenant had not paid the rent for 6 years. Yes, you heard that correctly, 6 years.
My
6 years.
gosh.
The landlord hadn't really done a lot about it. He was a bury your head in the sand kind of guy. Eventually came to mediation. And the first thing I do is obviously talk to both parties individually and get their side of the story, because there's three sides to a story: his, hers, and then the truth in the middle. So he told me she hadn't paid rent, she won't communicate this, that, and the other. I spoke to her, and after hearing about next door's dog and a load of other things that she wanted to bring into the mix that were totally irrelevant, she just said to me, 6 years ago, that man came round and did a property inspection, and he knocked my plant pot off the side. And you know that was my great grandma's plant pot. Didn't even say sorry, he didn't. I was like, what do you want? She went, I want him to apologise. I was like, is that it? She went, yes. I said, and what about the rent? She went, oh, don't you worry about that, my dear. That's in an ISA waiting for him to apologise. She had all the rent saved up ready.
Oh,
So I went
wow.
back to the landlord and explained the whole plant pot situation. And he went, I don't remember the damn plant pot. He said, I don't even remember going there for the inspection. I was like, okay. So he wrote her this beautiful apology, sent flowers, sent chocolates. The next day, all of the rent was in his account. Business done.
Oh my gosh. That almost gives me goosebumps. Something so simple and also so extreme. Like, you can imagine, I can't even imagine 6 years rent arrears. I mean, 6 months would be bad enough, but six
Well, yeah.
years. And the fact that she just had it in the ISA, waiting there, having, oh my gosh, that is
Yeah.
amazing. And I think that was another thing that you sort of, it kind of works with what you've just spoken about, is reframing. So you talked about the Nigerian mafia, and especially, I mean, young or old, I do. I'm a bit more like you, bit thick-skinned. I am 50, and actually, I've learned in the older years that reframing things, like everyone has, and in fact, I did a social media post on it the other day. We all look at the same thing, but for whatever reason, we see, hear, taste, tell, touch completely different things. And it really is quite mad. And just by saying, you know what, if this Nigerian mafia come around, I'm just going to put the kettle on. I mean, that was a completely different, it made me feel completely different to when, somebody is really threatening me. And
Yeah.
that is just so huge. And again, you would never in a million years have come out with the solution of your 6 years to landlord tenant issue and a
No.
broken pump pot. Oh my gosh. Do you have another? Can we have another story? Have you got another story?
Well, the problem is when you spend this long in property, they're never usually good stories. They're usually quite dark.
Yeah.
I've had my fair share of dead bodies.
Oh
Um,
no.
yeah, when I finally moved into consultancy, I think I'd got to my 12th deceased, and then yeah, well,
Oh
that was
my
probably enough now.
gosh. Oh, that is a bit extreme, isn't it? Oh,
Mm,
not good.
no.
So, how did you move through? So, I really love, this understanding what you're great at, and that is amazing. Especially, with young people coming through. I think there's a lot of people
Mm,
that just are not sure what they're supposed to do. In the olden days, it was kind of for us, wasn't it? You do one thing, you stick to it, and you become good at it, and that's kind of it. And now they can do whatever they want. It's
yeah.
quite overwhelming. But you really found out very early on that it was kind of problem solving. So tell me, how did you? Only because I'm really interested. How did you get into all the celebs and the famous people and Ricky Gervais, and how did that come about? Because that must have been really fun, wasn't it?
Yes and no.
Mm.
So I got into working for them with this property and asset company that I was working for in London. What our role was, would we would basically manage large portfolios on behalf of landlords. Now, 9 times out of 10, we didn't deal with the celebrity directly. We would usually be dealing with their finance broker. So that is the person that is there to save them from themselves. So you've got, 18-year-old footballers earning 100,000 a week. You
Oh.
know, you know exactly where that money's going to go. So
Mm.
these financial brokers are there to protect them from themselves. They take that money and they invest it for them so that they've got it there for the future. So what we would be doing is we would then get a phone call or an email from the broker saying, I don't know, Ricky Gervais has now bought another line of houses on this development, numbers 1 to 7. Can you take over the management of these? So that's how that would work. So we wouldn't necessarily be dealing directly, but like I say, Ricky was a bit more hands-on, what his partner Jane was. So we'd be dealing more directly with Jane. But yeah, that's kind of how it worked. And again, it was more luck than judgment, because when I went for the interview at this company, I didn't know who their client base was. I just, again, young ego, had been in property management for 5 minutes thinking, oh yeah, I can do asset and property management, not really understanding what an asset was. But yeah, still got the job, managed to talk my way. I think it's one of those bullshit baffles brains moments, and I managed to get myself through the interview, but I didn't really know how.
And that's so I'm actually writing my book at the moment. I don't know what it's going to be called yet, but it's my property mindset book. One of the things that's very interesting is that men in interviews are far more likely to be able to do what you described then as this kind of bullshitting your way into the job, and perhaps, knowing that you've got so far and, oh, I'm sure I'll be able to do the rest. Where do you, and I definitely come from that more of the position of a typical, and again, without, casting a web across everyone, but I definitely fall into that. Oh, I'm not good enough. Oh, I don't think I'm going to be able to do it. And I need to be shoved through the door
Hmm.
to do that. How do you think, is it kind of your upbringing? Did you have family that kicked you up the butt? What was it that you think gave you that extra bit of zoom to get you through the door? And no, because let's be fair, you clearly are great at it. You did do a good job. I'm sure there were times when you did some things wrong, but you should have gone in and given that supposed BS. But actually, it was the truth. You knew you got it. But where do you think that came from?
I genuinely don't know. And I don't know whether being an only child has a lot to do with it, because a lot of the time you are the only person in that relationship. I was brought up by much older parents. So my mum didn't have me until she was, I think it was 42. So
Oh.
back then in the 70s, that was quite an old mum.
Mm.
So I was brought up with a much more mature, older mentality from an extremely young age. So, it's that, old head on young shoulders. I've always been like that. I've always struggled to have conversations with people of my own age. When I was younger, I was like, I don't know what they're talking about, and even now I struggle with the younger generation, but then anyway. Um,
Yeah.
but I think that was a lot to do with it. I was a lot more mature than people of my age. So therefore I'm going in with a much more mature understanding of the job role, responsibility, getting up in the morning, getting to work on time. And that in itself, I think, brings confidence that youth doesn't necessarily have as a general rule.
Let's push on. So you also then, I believe quite a long time ago, set up a property networking group.
Yeah, 15 years this month, that one is.
Unbelievable. I didn't want to say it just in case, but yeah, I had it down as that. How and why? So, a lot of us, when we start off in property, I mean, I remember my very first property networking event. It was Eastbourne Pin, and I had no idea what the speakers were talking about. They kept talking numbers, they kept talking stuff, and I just thought, oh my gosh, I'm not sure this is for me. But equally, it was amazing. And then I've visited so many since, and it really is somewhere that you can go and feel
Yeah.
like you are like other people, because it can be a lonely world. So, what made you start, and how have you kept it going for so long? And by the way, Julie and I think, have properly met when you organised a ball as well a number of
Yeah.
years ago as well.
Yeah, property summer ball.
That's
So
it.
the reason why I started the networking event, and I have to blame Simon Zutzi for this one, I'm afraid.
Okay.
Simon had started up PIN, I think about 6 months or a year earlier, around that time. And the feedback I was getting from people was these PIN meetings were great, but actually they didn't have enough time to talk to anybody. So I was like, well, that's easy to fix. Just get rid of the speakers, right? But obviously, that wasn't the PIN setup. That wasn't what Simon was looking for. So I was like, well, if Simon can do it, I can do it. So I set up my own, started my own networking event, and I wasn't going to have speakers. I was literally going to have it to fill the gap that Simon had, and that's kind of been my trajectory, I think, through life. I just fill the gaps that other people have left, and that's propelled me forward. So this networking event I started up, it was always going to be local, and then maybe I would scale it up. I wasn't sure. I didn't know. I didn't really have a vision. So I started it local in Hemel and St Albans down in Hertfordshire. For the first 6 months, nobody came. Month after month, nobody came. I was like, well, this is fun. Then I changed venues. And as soon as I changed venues, people came. So obviously I put it in the wrong place. And it just grew from there, and it grew by word of mouth. I didn't really do any marketing for it. I didn't really do any advertising for it. I invited all the local letting agents who, to this day, letting agents still don't go to property networking events, still don't network with local landlords, which blows my mind.
Yeah. Baffling.
I
Why?
know. Yet they'll spend thousands weekly marketing to try and get new business through the door, yet they won't go where the new business is standing with a glass of wine. I don't get it. So it grew steadily, and I started it with food and drink was part of the ticket price. So everyone was sat down with a big table with food and drink and just started chit-chatting, and then it grew and grew, and we outgrew that venue. And then I moved to a larger, more commercial venue, and I thought, well, maybe it's now time to start having speakers. But those speakers weren't going to be investors. They were going to be industry experts talking about a small specific topic, like maybe just EPCs or maybe just gas certificates. And we had our first one at the new venue with speakers, and then COVID hit, and I had to close it all down. I was like, okay. So I went online like everybody else, and then it lost its momentum because with being online, anybody could join from anywhere. So I had people joining from Scotland, I had people joining from Wales. And I'm like, this is not your place. A, the legislation's different, and B, you don't know anything about Hemel and St Albans. So then it just started to drift away, and it came to a sort of slow stop. And then when we were all able to come back out and network again, nobody came.
Oh.
I was like, okay. So again, I moved venues, and a friend of mine was giving up their networking event. And I said, don't give it up, because they'd run theirs for 7 years. I said, let me take it on. And what I can do is I can have a month in St Albans, a month in Hemel. I'll, interchange it. Well, that didn't work in the end because even though I kept putting it on in Hemel, nobody came. So I amalgamated the two, and from that point onwards, it's been growing from strength to strength. Like you've mentioned, I then started putting on the annual summer ball. I've built the network up from nobody to average of 100 attendees a month. We do a Christmas free prize draw. Last year we had just over 20 grand's worth of prizes from within the industry, so training courses from property providers and stuff like that. So it's been really good, and I think you always get to a point where you have to know when you're done. So this June was my last event. And I've handed the baton over now to somebody else to run it
Wow.
because I got to the point where sadly I was no longer enjoying it, because I know a lot of property networking events are for the host. It's a money making. It
Mm.
is, you charge for tickets and this, that, and the other. Mine was free. There was only at the beginning when I had food was I charging, and that was just to cover the cost of the food. So I didn't actually make anything. And it was always a free event. We held it even in the August and December when other people didn't host theirs, and we always got a really good turnout. But then it got to the point where I just wasn't enjoying it anymore. And I think that's the time you have to step away. Otherwise, I could see what was going to happen. Everyone was going to feed off my negativity and it would have just died. So I've handed the baton over now to Richard Evans, who I know is a PIN speaker from Vavavoom. He's going to take it over from next month, from July, and I'm sure he'll take it in a different direction, but at least it's still there for everybody. And going back to your original question, which I've managed to miss completely, the reason why I started it was because, as you said, property is an extremely lonely business.
Mm.
And I was talking to people who kind of felt they were the only one going through this. And I thought if I could just get people to sit down and talk and understand that it's not just them. And it was more about peer-to-peer learning and peer-to-peer support. And obviously now I understand that more to be almost like a mental health safe place that people
Mm.
could come. But I suppose again that the ego element kicks in, and I wanted to change the private rented sector one landlord at a time. I haven't achieved that, but the network still went from strength to strength, so I achieved something.
15 years, that is just incredible. So a lot of things happened in just setting things like this up, and I'm just really keen. And what jumps out at me was one thing you talked about was filling the gaps, and it definitely looks like throughout your whole career you've seen the opportunities where perhaps others have shied away from it, and you've been successful from that. But equally, there's a lot of persistence going on in what you've been doing. I mean, you said, I started this up, nobody came, and then I did this, and then suddenly loads of people came. And, most people will make money from it. Most people do this. That is a huge persistence. What's kept you going with that? Was it, I mean, you spoke about quite a few reasons why you'd set it up, but what made you think, yeah, I'm just going to keep going? I know, did you just know it would be successful, or?
No, I don't think you ever set anything like that up knowing it's going to be successful, because ultimately, when you're doing anything that involves other people, you're completely and utterly reliant on them being um, involved directly in that. I mean, like I say, for the first 6 months, no one came. So without the attendees, I actually don't have a networking event. I just have an empty room and me. Um, and I think realistically, it was always that wanting to do better. This isn't enough. This isn't good enough. I need to do better. So, one of the things that I've done in the last couple of years was I actually registered the networking event as a community interest company. So I know for a fact I am the only networking event in the UK that is purely not for profit. It's completely a community interest company. So we work with St Albans local homeless charity, local council, things like that. So I knew from that point onwards I always wanted to have something that was different. I didn't want to be the same as everybody else. And again, I think that comes from being an only child. You are programmed not to conform, I think. So in that respect, it was always I wanted to stand out. I want people to go, oh, Julie did that. Julie did that. And I think again I learned early on that for me it wasn't about financial gain. It should have been, and I'd probably be in a very different place now if my focus had been financial. But I'm very much a soft outcome person. If I put that networking event on and somebody messaged me and goes, do you know, thanks for that. If it wasn't for tonight, I probably wouldn't be here, or something like that. That gives me more than if they'd have slipped 100 grand in my pocket.
Mm.
So it was always about what I was giving back to everybody else. And I think I've always had that in every job that I've done. And the citizens advice job, I think, again, took me to that next level of pleasing people. I'm a people pleaser at the end of the day. And I think the citizens advice job role really took me there.
And that is a perfect segue into my next question, which was I'm just sort of looking at your career and sort of walking through it. How did you get into the sort of citizens advice side of things? Was that literally just a job? How did that come to fruition?
Yeah, so again, that was a sort of a little bit by accident. I'd lost my job and I was unemployed, but I'm not very good at sitting on the sofa watching Jeremy Kyle. So I couldn't get a job. It just, I don't know, the world just wasn't that way. So I thought, well, I've got to do something, get out of the house. So I volunteered for the Citizens Advice and I started off on reception. Um, Dealing with people coming in with their problems. Again, I could chit chat to people. I'm quite good with off the cuff. So if someone's got like some random thing left field, I'm still able to carry on the conversation. But I realized this wasn't going to fulfill me. And then the opportunity came up to train as a general advisor. Now, again, that was a volunteer role. Now, the citizens' advice don't mess around when it comes to training. It's 2.5 years of training to become a general advisor.
Wow.
So I did that. And of course, I excelled because that's what I do. I did the same at school. I was the only person in my school that did 15 GCSEs and passed them all. I did four
Oh,
A levels. I went to uni.
gosh.
If I put myself into education, I will always excel. So doing this training with the Citizens Advice, of course, I flew through the training. And then the opportunity came up. There was a job advert, which was housing and homeless law specialist. Now, I was already obsessed with housing law and everything like that. So I applied for the job, even though I didn't meet the criteria. So who cares?
Yeah.
Applied for the job, got an interview, did the interview, and then of course you get the thanks but no thanks email afterwards. And I was like, oh well, never mind. I quite like interviews anyway because I find I like the pressure it puts me under, and the more interviews I do, the less anxiety I get with interviews. It's like it just becomes common nature. But also for me, I turn it around. It's not actually about them interviewing me for a job. It's actually about me interviewing them. Is this a company I want to work for? So I
Nice.
do turn it round a bit.
Yeah.
And then 3 weeks later, I got a very sheepish phone call from the bureau manager who said, right, well, we gave that job to so and so because he was already doing this job, but in a different citizen's advice. Well, that citizen's advice has now offered him more money, so he's not having the job. Nobody else came for the interview. Do you want the job? I was like,
Oh, they really sold
oh,
it to you then.
I was like, a bit more enthusiasm wouldn't have gone amiss, but all right. So I was like, yeah, I'll take it. Let's give it a
Oh
go.
my gosh.
So I took it on, and that I think was a real pivotal moment in my career because it was at that point and that point only I genuinely saw nothing but the tenants side of everything.
Okay.
Prior to that, I had seen everything from the landlord letting agent point of view. And yeah, that was a huge turning point. And I learned probably more about myself in that time than I did about the job I was doing. And again, that just really sparked more in me about I'm here to help people. I'm here to solve problems. I found out things at the Citizens Advice about how tenants could access funding to pay rent arrears. Didn't even know that was a thing prior to that. And then after the Citizens Advice, I've worked my way through Citizens Advice, so housing and homeless law specialist. I worked up to advice session supervisor, so basically in charge of the bureau and all the advisors and debt advisors underneath me.
Wow.
And then from there, again, I wasn't quite fulfilled with that, but knew I didn't want to take the next step up to full management because I'm a hands-on person. I'm not really a manager. So I took a sidestep and took a job at a local homeless charity. And my job there was leasehold asset manager. So I was basically working with landlords in the private sector, convincing them to give them our properties so we could lease them for 5 years to work with people who were street homeless through the homeless shelter into these accommodations, so that we then had a 2-year program with them, teaching them how to be a good tenant so we could then move them on to their own settled accommodation. Again, a complete change to even where I'd been at Citizens Advice, because when you're working with a homeless charity, you're working with people who have self-medicated addictions. You are working with criminals. You are working with people who have severe mental health issues. You're not just sitting down having rational conversations with people. You're sometimes, some of the people I was working with, you couldn't be in a room alone with them because it was unsafe. We had one gentleman who had so many different personalities, it wasn't even possible to hold a conversation with him because at each point you'd asked a question, somebody else had answered. So none of them kept in touch with each other in his head. So that was really difficult. And then we had other really violent ones who, we had one gentleman who'd unfortunately raped his mum. So as females, we couldn't be alone with him. But we didn't have any male co-workers, so we then had to double up, but we still weren't really safe. So all of those things come into play, and I think it then comes down to what I bang on about time after time, and it's communication. Because I would have had people that would have put me in some really dangerous situations in that job, and I have got to either talk my way out of it or fight my way out of it, one of the two. And I think now, bringing all of those things to where I am today, I don't think I'd be here as a trainer delivering the way I deliver if I hadn't have had those past experiences in those jobs. A lot of them quite negative when I look back on them now, and I certainly wouldn't want anybody to come into the industry and have those experiences. But at the same time, if I hadn't, I couldn't do the job I'm doing today. So it's a bit of a double-edged sword, really. But I think ultimately communication, if you are able to talk to somebody on whatever level they're on using their vernacular, so you can relate to them, whether that means 1 minute you've got to be, speaking like Princess Charlotte and the next you've got to be speaking street, you need to be able to be so adaptable. And I think it's exactly the same in property management, because I will work with tenants who, every other word is a swear word, but that's just how they talk. I can't be insulted by that. I can't go, oh, don't swear. And the only way I'm going to communicate with them is if I speak in the same way. But then I could be speaking to a tenant who's maybe in their 70s or 80s, and I know that I must speak to them much more respectfully. There's words that I need to use to get what I want. So I think it's just being hugely adaptable, but just understanding that everybody is so different, and if you can't communicate, then I don't think you're going to get on in property.
Wow, that was huge, Julie. And the song comes about what doesn't kill you makes you stronger.
Yeah.
I mean, that is quite a lot, and you have just got so much persistence in your journey. You've really sort of seen things, known what you like, what you enjoy, understood your, where you don't want to go, because you're obviously clearly highly academic, highly intelligent as well. But that's quite something to understand that, management, for instance, isn't for you. And that's something, because again, I think your ego sometimes, I mean, you've mentioned ego, can take over, and suddenly you're doing this thing that you really hate. You're not doing, you're not answering the needs of everyone around you, whereas you've just been quite focused on doing the things that you can help with, and go forward with that. Amazing. So let's keep moving forward, because I really want to cover as much as we can. So then you started doing sort of training with the NRLA. Is that how this kind of more sort of training consultancy side started? Have I missed anything massive?
No, you've not missed anything massive, but I think COVID was probably the pivotal moment in where I was going to go.
Yeah.
When COVID happened, I was unemployed at the time.
Right.
And it was also quite a sobering moment because I was applying for jobs, not getting them, not getting them, which I've never had that before. I've always write a mean application, always got offered an interview, would 9 times out of 10 get offered the job at the interview. And this wasn't even getting to interview. And I was like, what's going on out there? Why? What's wrong with me? So you start to then doubt yourself. Am I really any good at this? Do I really know my stuff, or have I just been faking it all this time? Have I just been making it up? Um, but then I started to look back at the more recent jobs that I just had and why they'd ended so badly. The last three jobs that I had, I'd been fired from. So you kind of like, well, the common denominator in that was me. So why do I keep getting fired from jobs that I'm really good at? So I took the time to speak to professionals. I don't know if I want to call them a therapist, but I
Yeah.
took my time to speak to some professionals and actually understand what it was. And it turned out that I'd got to a point in my career where I was genuinely unemployable. Unemployable because I knew more and had more experience than most of the managers that were trying to manage me. I was basically unmanageable. I'm not unmanageable. You just have to learn how to speak to me. And if you're going to come at me with all this fluffy buzzwords, I'm just going to tell you to go do one. If you just want me to get on with my job, then just tell me to just get shit done. And the other problem I was having was there were females managing me. And unfortunately, strong females intimidate weak females. And all of these females thought I was after their job. And I remember saying to a CEO, love, if I wanted your job, I'd already have it. Interestingly, I wasn't in that job for much longer. But you know, you know, but
I'd love
this
to
is
have
the
been a fly on the wall.
but I
Fantastic.
then sort of said, right, I've got to go out and sort of go on my own again. I'd already had my letting agency business in Norfolk that I'd run, so I was knew that I could run a business by myself. But again, it was that coming out of that comfort zone of being an employee and the wages just appear in your bank account at the end of the month. This time I've got to start grafting again. So I set myself up just doing advice, and again, I'd sort of taken what I'd learned at Citizens Advice. And at the moment, I needed to solve a problem. And that problem was we had COVID, there was a moratorium on evictions, and tenants were being furloughed and sacked left, right, and centre. They were building up rent arrears, and landlords could do absolutely nothing about it. So I started the rent arrears support service, and I worked with landlords whose tenants were in rent arrears, and we tapped into the 1.7 billion pounds worth of funding that's available for tenants who are struggling to pay their rent. So
Is that
most of this,
million, 1.7 million?
no, billion, BN, billion, 1.7 billion is available to tenants in rent arrears across the country, predominantly made up of government funding through local councils, but 380 million of it is also available through local legacies, trusts, and charities. So I was working with tenants who had 6, 7, 8,000 pounds worth of rent arrears, and within a couple of months working with the charities, I had these rent arrears paid off, money in the back pocket to the landlord where it should be, and the tenant being able to move forward. So that was again a gap that needed filling, and nobody else was filling it. And the reason why they weren't filling it is because as companies, it wasn't cost effective. But for me, sat at home in my lounge with my laptop, it was cost effective for me to do this work. So it made sense that I filled that gap. And that in itself has then grown. It got picked up by the NRLA, it got noticed. I then wrote a training course on this exact thing, this rent arrears support management, delivered that with the NRLA directly. So I'd written this course for them, delivered it. That then took another step, and it got noticed by Tessa Shepperton at Landlord Law. And we then developed that as a kit that landlords could actually purchase with all of the template letters and everything involved. So that then grew sort of organically. And now I've actually turned it into its own standalone training course with embedded videos and everything like that, all the templates that people can purchase directly if they want to. And it's now also a training course that I deliver to letting agents, because I believe, again, I'm solving a future problem that when the renters' rights bill comes in, tenants will have to be 3 months in arrears before a landlord can serve a 4-week notice. So technically that's 4 months in arrears before a landlord can go to court. Well, within 2 to 3 months, I could already resolve the rent arrears problem without needing to go to court. So it's, if you could have one of me in every letting agent in the country, you'd pretty much eradicate rent arrears overnight.
Wow, I'm literally astounded. Anyone who's listening to the podcast, I'm now shutting my jaw in the chat about 1.7 billion supporting, tenants in rent arrears, and obviously some of that is also 380 million in sort of charities and stuff like
Mm.
that. So, oh, we can't. I mean, gosh, you've covered so much now, but we need to, I think, sort of look on that. So. Yeah, just tell us a bit more. Is that still available? Is this ongoing all the time? Because certainly, I mean, I started in serviced accommodation, so I didn't have tenants. And then I've now got tenants, and it's been an interesting journey. And I think I've now served Section 21s. I've done an 8, apparently, Section 8, which is unusual,
Yeah.
apparently. But all from a positive standpoint. Um, I have been up to date pretty much with rent, but there is always something in the background. My family have got a few buy-to-lets, and that's something that they really panic about.
Mm.
So tell us more, Julie. Explain it a bit more, and why is it that I mean, just want to bang my head against the wall, a bit like you were saying that letting agents don't come to networking events. Why is it that these people do not know these things?
I think because it's not genuinely publicised. Ultimately, the media as a whole will only sell you, horror stories because that's what sells. Um, but I think it's just because it's not made public. I mean, councils are not forthcoming with the fact that they have all of this money available to support tenants in rent arrears. Predominantly, that's under a fund called the Homelessness Prevention Fund. That's the biggest pot, and that pot of money is given to all of the local councils by the government every year. And if they don't spend it, they don't get it again next year. So it's in their best interest to spend it. And this is there basically to allow tenants to remain in their home and sustain tenancy. So it keeps them in the private rented sector rather than having to have them come and make homeless applications and then go for social housing, which isn't there. And again, once they've gone through the homelessness process, which costs on average every council £32,000 per person that they put through the homelessness process. So even if someone's rent arrears is a quarter of that, the council still save themselves some money out of a different pot.
Yeah.
So what would happen is once the council have proved that they've got a main duty to house somebody, they then don't have the social housing to house them. So the legislation actually allows the council to discharge their main duty back into the private sector anyway. So that private sector tenant could have stayed in private sector for a lot cheaper if the tenants just pay off the rent arrears, rather than have them go through the whole homelessness process only to be discharged back into the private sector anyway. So it's about squaring a circle, really, and just having some joined up thinking. But a lot of councils, I say a lot, all of the councils, none of the departments interlink. So housing benefit don't talk to council tax don't talk to tenancy don't speak to homeless. So
Yeah.
none of them, and even their computer systems don't interlink. So you can have one client on each of the different systems and none of them link up. So they don't communicate. So for me, it's just about understanding what is available to tenants. And I think landlords and letting agents have a duty to know what's available. What they don't need to be is social workers and debt advisors. They don't need to be that. We're not their parents. We're not, not going around wiping bums. But if you as a landlord can signpost your tenant to what is available, and if they need, a bit of support, then set them up a meeting with citizens advice, set them up a meeting with step change. All of those things can help that tenant nip it in the bud early. And I will say it time and time again, if you've got a tenant who's in rent arrears, you need to act when the tenant is a day late or a penny short. Anything longer than that, and you're causing yourself your own problem.
Wow. So it really is all about being very quick. And is that something, so you've spoken about a course. I'm thinking about, the lay person. Do they come to you? Do they go, where would you advise that? So let's say tomorrow is rent day. Where are we? We're at the beginning of the week, but let's say, it's
Yeah.
rent day and suddenly you check your bank account, it hasn't happened. What's the next stage? What is the journey? What do they do?
So the next stage is picking up the phone and speaking to the tenant.
Mm,
I don't know how many times I say, please don't WhatsApp them, please don't text them, please don't send them a snotty email because you're already determining where this is going to go. Pick up the phone. The reason why I say pick up the phone is because you hear so much more in someone's tone of voice than you do on a text message. So if I spend 3 hours, painstakingly writing this text message so that it's just perfect, and I send it to you, and I'm like, right, I am confident that that isn't abusive, offensive in any, it's perfect. You've got the and you're going to open that text message and you're going to read it in the frame of mind that you are in, not in the frame of mind and tone that that person has painstakingly taken the time to write it in. So that tenant is going to read all the punctuation in the wrong place, and they're going to assume that you're shouting at them, even though you haven't been. But you can't do that with a tone of voice when you're being genuine. So you pick up the phone and you don't say, bitch, where's my money? You say, I see the rent hasn't come in. Is everything okay? Is there anything I can do to help? That completely changes where that conversation is going to go, because they immediately think, oh, actually, they're not going to shout at me. People are always scared of confrontation. They're always scared, what if? What's the worst that's going to happen? Well, the worst that's going to happen is they're going to lose their house. They're petrified of being homeless. So if you can immediately get rid of that problem, the rest is really easy. Okay, so you've lost your job. I'm really sorry to hear about that. Have you signed up for universal credit? If not, do you want to meet me at the library and we'll go through the application together? All of those things, occupational grants, I think, are the ones that people miss out on the most. And when it was COVID time and I was working with landlords, predominantly these were the ones that were paying off thousands and thousands of pounds worth of rent arrears for tenants, because people don't realise that if you are in a job or you've been in a job, you can still tap into all of these grants and charities. So the most popular one that I was working with through COVID was Hospitality Action, because you can imagine people in restaurants, cafes, bars, they were all struggling. So
mm.
Hospitality Action paid out for most of them. There's, every occupation you can think of, but hair and beauty. I had one tenant who was in 7.5 grand's worth of rent arrears, and he was self-employed. He was a self-employed motorsport photographer. So quite an obscure job in the grand scheme of things. And he was one of those that was listening to John down the pub. Now, we've all got John down the pub, haven't we? John down the pub had told him he couldn't apply for benefits because he was self-employed. He wasn't allowed. So he literally had no money. And by that, I mean no money. He was going to the local church just to get food. It was dire. So I worked with him. The landlord sacked the letting agent because the letting agent had literally done nothing. So I worked with this tenant, and because he was in motorsport photography, I was kind of like, well, that's sort of journalism, right?
Yeah.
So I applied to a number of journalist charities explaining the situation, and I also applied to a couple of motorsport charities because I thought, well, there's a kind of sort of interlink there, expecting them all to go, no, you're barking up the wrong tree. And no, they all came back and said, yeah, absolutely, we'll help, but we can't give you the full amount. So between, I think it was 5 charities plus discretionary housing payment from the council, and then he signed up for universal credit. We cleared that 7.5 grand's worth of arrears pretty much overnight. He was
Amazing.
on universal credit, and the landlord was happy to accept the local housing allowance until he got his job back.
Yeah.
So, that was that.
Oh, wow, that is absolutely incredible. So just to go back to, this next day, obviously you have a chat. Is it something that people can literally come to you and call up? Is it, with these issues? Is that directly what you do? Do you work one-on-one with landlords?
Yeah, so not so much now. I've sort of stepped away from the casework simply because the training has taken sort of
Yeah.
more of an element to it. But yeah, absolutely. I do have an advice service that people can pay for either as a subscription or as an ad hoc basis, whichever they choose. That's all on my website if anybody wants to go on there. And then, yeah, I can book a session with them. We can talk through. But really, I'm there to empower people to do this
Yeah.
for themselves. So we'll talk through all the options, all the possible outcomes, solutions. What is it that they want? Because sometimes people just go, oh, I'm going to evict. But when you look at, right, the eviction's probably going to take you 18 months at most. It's going to cost this amount of money. If we go through the grant funding, we'll probably have it done and dusted in 3 months and you'll have all your money back. But if you go through court and get a money order and he's on benefits, you're going to get that for £5 a month for the next 670 years. So, you know, it doesn't make sense. So it's looking at all the options, looking at the practical elements, where the landlord is from a cash flow point of view. Is this fatal? If it is, then let's just get rid of the tenant. Let's work with the tenant, sign a deed of surrender, end the tenancy now. The tenant then has a limited amount of debt. Sometimes the landlords just write it off, but landlord's got his property back and can start again.
Yeah.
So there's lots of options available when the tenant's in rent arrears. It doesn't necessarily have to be straight to court and all the stress and rigmarole that goes with that.
Amazing. Well, we'll definitely be putting a link to Julie's website and all other information in the show notes. So please do jump on that and have a look. So obviously we've got the renters' right bill coming up. I mean, gosh, there's just been a huge song and dance. One way we're dancing this way, next way we're dancing that way. Sometimes we're dancing up and sometimes we're dancing down. It's just like, you know, crazy. I think my main question, and I'm kind of one, I don't worry about stuff until it's actually affecting me. And so in all fairness, I did follow it quite heavily. And now I just, you know, I tag in and out at various stages because I basically want to know what I need to be worried about. Do you feel we should be worried about the Renters' Rights Bill?
No, not at all. I don't think anybody needs to be worried. And, you know, it's frustrated me for some considerable time. There are some people out there on social media that are using quite frightening language when it comes to the Renters' Rights Bill. You know, they're calling it fatal. They're saying it's dangerous. You know, they're saying, you know, it's brutal. No, it isn't actually. All it's doing is consolidating a load of case law that has happened over the last 30 years, and we're now turning it into legislation. Getting rid of Section 21 is kind of irrelevant to how landlords operate. Section 21 is a no-fault notice, so it basically means the tenant's done nothing wrong, I just want my house back, please. Landlords have used Section 21 far too long as the easy way out because there's no challenge. It won't necessarily go to court. You got your property back. It was a bit easy. Now landlords are going to have to start working to get their property back. So they're going to have a ground and a reason, and they're going to have to do the paperwork. But ultimately, no landlord has ever served a Section 21 on a good tenant just because they've woke up on a Monday morning going, do you know what? I'm going to get rid of that good paying tenant and I'm going to have the property empty for a couple of months. Idea. No one's ever done that. It's a nonsense. Section 21 has been used because the landlord wants to sell, the landlord wants to move back in. Renters' Rights Bill is giving you those grounds under ground 1 and ground 1A when it comes in anyway. So everything that you would have normally used a Section 21 for, you have a ground for it in the new bill anyway.
Amazing. Yeah. I mean, I've watched you speak, I've watched others speak, and it's like all things that are thrown at anyone in business or anyone in property. You just got to surround yourself with people like yourself, Julie, who are really, you know, competent and know so much of what we don't know, because we can't know everything, can we?
And nobody can know everything. And I say that to people all the time. I learn something new every day in this industry. I don't know it all. And if you come across anyone in property who says they know it all, I tell you now, they're lying, because it's not possible. It's not possible. Some random situation will happen and I'll go, wow, that's never happened before. How do we sort that out? I've learned something new today. So even I'm still learning. And I think that's what property is all about. It's one of those industries where you can never know. You can never know it all. It's just not physically possible.
Amazing. Okay, I've got one final question before we're going to jump into our quick fire round, if that's okay, Julie.
Yeah.
So you've talked about rent arrears, which I wholly understand, but I've had an experience that was quite new, certainly to me, in having a tenant who potentially had some mental health issues, absolutely, but was really an issue for the rest of the housemates. And obviously you hear about and slightly behind sometimes, but then would sort of pull it back up. But What are your kind of thoughts around that? I mean, in the end, this particular one has done some quite extreme things. So we've been able to go down the route, and he is actually in a very positive way. Because again, I'm all about positivity, and sometimes I think that's wrong because I think sometimes you're being trodden on. But it is working out well now. But it was very upsetting because it was getting to the point where potentially, and this is a 9-bed property, everyone else wanted to move out because of this one person. What are your thoughts around that?
I think this is something that's becoming more and more common because mental health is something that people are suffering with more and more. And we could open the can of worms as to why, there is no real mental health community support out there. They're closing down mental health hospitals, etc., etc. And pretty much police, fire, and ambulance are on the front line dealing with mental health crisis when that's not really their job. And I think it's very difficult because when we're choosing our tenants, the one thing we don't do is have them do some kind of mental health test to decide whether they're, physically capable of sustaining a tenancy. But mental health crises can happen at any point, triggered by anything. So it isn't something we can really sort of plan for. But I think it's important that we understand how we've got our tenancies set up. So in situations like that, don't have people on joint tenancies because joint tenancies are so much more difficult to dismantle when you need to remove one person. Have everybody on room tenancies because then it's much easier to work with that one human being who needs support and everybody else is in their own tenancies. You can look at the legal implications and also the legal support. So the other occupants, the other tenants can actually seek injunctions, occupation orders, things like that to actually ban the other tenant from entering the property. I would immediately get in touch with adult social services to get that person put on the radar. And I'd also report anything that is in any way, shape, or form criminality to the police, because this then supports you later on if you need to use a Section 8 using the antisocial behaviour grounds. But ultimately, it really does depend on that person's level of mental health crisis. If they're just having a down day, then have a conversation with them. But if this is something where you are looking at maybe self-medication or whether you're looking at personality disorders, things like that, then it needs to have professionals come in and deal with that because as landlords, we're not equipped for that. And also as landlords, we are immediately emotionally involved because that's our property. And you need somebody who is one step away from that emotionality because otherwise you are going to get emotional and angry. That's only going to trigger and it's all just going to descend into chaos. So even if it's not necessarily a mental health professional, if you've got somebody who is a property manager who can come in, who's got no link to the property whatsoever and have those conversations, you've immediately removed a level of emotion from that conversation.
Really great feedback. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. All of those. And I think that emotional, certainly from, mindset perspective, when you are so emotionally charged with that, I mean, certainly some of the things this chap has done was just really shocking. I couldn't even talk to it about to my kids, really extreme stuff. So, yeah, no, great feedback. Fantastic. Okay, so let's jump into this quick round. So if you could just literally just respond, a couple of words if that's possible. So
Okay.
who has shaped your career the most?
Wow. I think I'd probably have to say that was me.
I thought you might. I love that. Fantastic. You've definitely been such a strong force, and your persistence is, yeah, really inspiring. What book has influenced you and perhaps your mindset the most?
The
If there is,
12-week year.
oh, brilliant. Yeah, that is a great one, isn't it? I love that.
Yeah.
If you could now only do one thing, it doesn't matter about money, anything like that, but the one thing that you really love, what would it be and why?
Um, Formula One sidecar racing.
Oh, that's not what I expected. Oh my gosh, that's a whole nother story. I love that. Oh, amazing. I want to see some photos. And finally, what is your non-negotiable morning routine?
Cup of tea.
Oh, me too. Oh, me. No, I can't even do a podcast without a cup of tea. Yeah, you got to have a cup of tea, haven't you? Oh, and in fact, you'll love this. Oh, can you see it? Enormous. I love that. Oh, Julie, thank you so much. So just quickly, where can we find you? Is there anything that I haven't mentioned that I need to get into the show notes for you? Because obviously you are just such an incredible, like, hive of information. I mean, I've seen you talk. I know what you can do, and it is absolutely amazing the knowledge that you have. Where can we come and find you?
So you can find me on social media all over the place. I am Julie Ford TV on all of the platforms. And obviously on my website, gothardrow.com.
Amazing, amazing. Well, look, thank you so much. You've been an absolute star. Yeah, look forward to seeing you soon. So thank you, everybody. So today, as you've seen, Julie has, gosh, completely blown my mind. I can't get over the 1.7 billion pounds that is available to cover rent arrears. And do remember, property success isn't just about what you do, it's about how you think. And when you combine a strong strategy with an unstoppable mindset, there is no limit to what you can achieve. So do reflect on Julie's conversations today and consider what is something that you can take on board this week to move you closer to your property goals. And do remember, if you know anyone who is struggling in their property journey, please share this episode, as it could be the game changer that they need. Because exactly like Julie has been talking about, the more people we can help, actually, the greater our own wealth is in every sense of the word. And growing this community really means growing the potential we all have to succeed together. So do remember, your mindset is your greatest property. Keep building it.